Hello there. In this video, we will look at how to store the mine data into a Postgres database for further analysis and interpretation. So I will be using the code in the previous example from the Mining the Web for Fun and Profit video. If you haven't already seen that video, please view that using the link below. So I will start with the base code we had created in the previous video. Before we actually write code to insert data into a database, we need to go ahead and set up the database. Now what I have done is I've chosen the Backtrack 3.0 distro as the platform, and this is the default install of Backtrack 3.0, and that has the Postgres database. However, one needs to go ahead, create the Postgres users, create the database, etc. to actually get started. So I'll show you the quickest way to get started with Postgres, and that is the hacker way. So the first thing we need to do is actually create the Postgres user. By default, Backtrack does not have a Postgres user. So we use the user add command and user add and simply Postgres. The next thing is actually go ahead and change into a directory where you want to store the data. So I've gotten into a directory which I've mounted, and then we are going to create the directory for the DB, which is, let's say, data, by using the makedir command. Now the next thing to do is actually change the ownership of the data. So by default, as we know in Backtrack, we are root. However, the data directory needs to be owned by the Postgres user. So we use the chown command and go ahead and change ownership to Postgres. Once we are done, let's go ahead and su to Postgres and then change back into the same directory we created for the data. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is initialize the database. So that is done using the initdb command with the -d option and then the directory name. So this actually creates all the different database structural files which will be required by Postgres. So this should take a couple of seconds. Once all these files have been created, now we can go ahead and start the actual Postgres database server-side process. We can simply do this by cut pasting this command here, pg_ctl, which is Postgres control. I'd prefer to change the log file location to the same data directory, because sometimes it's easier later on to look at the logs and figure out what went wrong for a given database directory. Once this is done, press enter to start the server-side process. Now let's go ahead and create a database for the server process. Let's create a database called test. So we do that using the createdb command, and once we are done, it actually throws a string back saying create database, which actually means the database creation was successful. So now we have a Postgres server which is running, and a database inside that Postgres server called test, which is currently hosted in the data directory which we created. The next thing we need to do is create a user, and because the current user is Postgres, however, we would like to run most of our programs as root, which is probably a bad thing to do from a security perspective. But in this example, let's stick to that to keep things really simple. Let's create a Postgres user, make him super user, and give it the root name. You can press yes to all of these questions, allow him to create new roles, etc., etc. Once this is done, then the root user has been created for Postgres. Let's exit and quickly type in the whoami command, and we are root. So the point to note here is that we went ahead, created the Postgres directory, started the Postgres server process, created the database, etc. as the Postgres user. Finally, we created a new user and attached it to the profile of root, so that now we can run our various programs and connect to the database server as the user root. Now, generally, this is a very insecure thing to do, and it would be preferred if most programs run as a non-privileged user. However, getting into the complexities of how to do all that is a separate topic which I'll probably take up in a different video. So in this video, I want to keep it really very simple, how to get started with a Postgres database and then go ahead and insert data into it. Okay. So once we are back into the root login, let's just use the PSQL command to connect to the database. So PSQL is nothing but PostgreSQL client program. However, there isn't much currently inside the database. It's an empty database. So what we need to do is create a table inside the database. So for that, let's create a very simple SQL file, simple.sql, where we define a very simple table, create table simple, and it's just going to have 3 columns, the first being an ID, which is a serial. If you're not familiar with Postgres data types, etc., you can just have a quick look at the documentation. However, what serial means is this is an auto-incrementing column where with every new row which we create, it actually increments the value. So the first row will be named 1, the second will be 2, the third will be 3. It auto-increments. The next row, column which we create is parent page. Let's define it as a text type. And then finally a link, which also we can define as the text type. Then let's close the table. So what we will do is that in the previous program, we had actually mined a web page and then passed all the links in the web page. Now in this very simple example, we'll try to push those links into the database. So parent page is nothing but the initial root page we mined. And link is nothing but individual links, both inbound and outbound, on that particular page. So we've defined this very simple table. Now let's go ahead and create it. We just use the PSQL command for that. Test is the database, and then in direction simple.sql. So this creates the table. Let's log on to the Postgres database and just do a select star on the simple table. So as we can see right now, the table has been created. It has the 3 columns, ID, parent page, and link. However, there is no data, and that is why you get the 0 rows message. Now let's actually go quit the PostgreSQL terminal and go back to our initial program. But before that, what we need to do is install a driver for the PostgreSQL server. So what will happen is, through Python, we need some library using which we can go ahead and connect to the PostgreSQL server. And for that, we need to download a library such as PyGreSQL. So we've already downloaded that. There is a link available in the summary. Let's go ahead, unzip it, and then actually install it. So the installation is pretty straightforward. There's a setup.py, and we just give the command install. So this installs the library. The important thing to note here is the library or module extension. So basically _PG is kind of the name of the library, right? And this is what we need to use in our program when we import that module. Okay, so let's now quickly go back to our original program, right? So what we've done till now is we've installed the Postgres database. We've created a database called test. In that, there is a very simple table called simple, which has an ID column, a parent page column, and a link column, right? And we've also installed a library to connect to the Postgres database called PyGreSQL. And now we've come back to our code from the previous example, which we will modify. So what we'll do is, let's go back to the part where we dump all the links in the page. Let's uncomment so that we can use this executable part of the code. The first thing we need to do is actually import the database library, which was _pg, right? So for that, it's a very simple import _pg. The next thing we need to do is connect to the database, right? We use this by using the _pg dot connect method, and we pass it the name of the database, which is test, which is what we created, and the server name, which of course is localhost because it's hosted on the same machine, right? Very simple piece of code. Now what we need to do is the place where we are actually printing the links, we need to go ahead and create a very simple query string which will insert these link records into the database. So for that, let's name the query string as db query string is equal to, this is where a little bit of SQL knowledge will come in handy, and that is insert into simple, which is the name of the table, and then the columns which we want to insert into, those are going to be parent page and link, and then the final values, right, which is of course going to be the parent page, which in the case of this program is actually sys.argv1, and then the second is going to be the link which we just discovered, which is actually going to be the link and then the href attribute, right? Very simple piece of code. We need the href in quotes, right? So I think this is just very basic SQL, the insert statement and all of that. If you're lost here, probably please go through a quick primer on SQL. This is a very simple statement. The final thing we need, of course, to do is now go ahead and execute the db query string. This is done by using the query method, where we give the db query string as input, right? So we need to do a little bit of error checking. Once again, I've tried to keep the code as simple as possible so that we can easily follow. So I'm leaving out the error checking and everything here. Okay, great. And then finally, what we need to do is actually close the database connection, right? Because once you insert all the links, all the records and everything, it's a good idea to generally close the connection. Generally in very multi-threaded programs, if you do not close the connection, you'll soon run out of database connections. Anyway, that could cause a DOS attack. So let's quickly look at the piece of code. Very simple. We imported the library, we created a database connection to the test database on the machine localhost. Then we created a query string to insert individual links into the database, and then we executed that string, right? Okay, so very simple piece of code. This is all that we've added onto the program. Just, I think, 5 more lines of code, 6 more lines of code. Now let's go ahead and execute the program using the same input, which is securitytube.net as the page to analyze. Okay, let's press enter. Now this is once again going to list all those links which we've seen in the previous example. If you're unfamiliar with what these are, would request you to go look at the previous video. However, what should also have happened is that these links should also have been inserted into the database. Let's verify that. Let's connect to the database, PSQL, name of the database test. And now let's do a select star on the simple table. Great. So now as we can clearly see, we have the ID column, parent page column, and the link column. And if you notice, it's all populated with the data which we just ripped off from the securitytube.net page, right? Well, that's all. I mean, the important thing to note here is that one needs to set up the database properly, the database schema, and then write the code which will interface with the database in order to insert these records. So we saw that how simple it was to actually go ahead and insert into a database. Let's go back to the program and once again quickly recapitulate what we did. Once again, very simple piece of code. Imported the database library, connected to the database, created the query string, and inserted those data sets into the database by running the query. That's all. So what I would request you to do is take this piece of code, play around with it, probably even change the various insert statements and try and do various interesting things. So I've kept the entire discussion here very generic so that you can probably rip off data from any source, which could be the web, FTP sites, or anywhere, and then insert that into the database. And as one can imagine, once any data is into the database, it is very easy to now run an analysis engine which can look into all of that data and probably conclude and do various other tasks. Well, that's all for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, if you have any comments, if you didn't like it for whatever reason, positive, negative, please leave a feedback below in the comment section. That will help me improve the next video. That's all. Thank you very much.